In 1982, a series of events in and around Chicago transformed consumer safety. On the morning of September 29, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman told her parents she wasn't feeling well, so they gave her an extra-strength Tylenol capsule. Immediately after, Mary collapsed. She was dead by 10 a.m. That same day, postal worker Adam Yanis came down with a cold. He purchased some extra-strength Tylenol at a supermarket. He took 2 capsules and immediately went into convulsions. He later died in hospital. Doctors suspected that the 27-year-old had a heart attack. After grieving at the hospital, Adam's family came together at his home to comfort his wife and 2 small children. His brother Stanley was so grief-stricken, he came down with a headache. He grabbed some Tylenol from the same bottle Adam had purchased earlier that day. He offered some to his newly wedded wife, Teresa. They took 2 capsules each. Soon after, they collapsed. Stanley died that day. Teresa held on for 2 more days before passing away. The unusual deaths caught the attention of firefighters from the affected suburbs of Chicago. Firefighter Richard Keyworth said, "This is a wild stab, but maybe it's Tylenol." Another firefighter who had the same suspicions reached out to a nurse from the local community. Nurse Helen Jensen spoke to Adam Yanis' widow and realized all 3 family members had taken Tylenol. She thought, it has to be the Tylenol. But she said the medical examiner and police didn't believe her and even laughed it off. In another suburb of Chicago, Mary Reiner was feeling woozy. She had given birth to her 4th child 2 days earlier. The hospital gave her some Tylenol to help with her postpartum recovery, and she also purchased some from a store. Immediately after taking 2 capsules, she felt dizzy and collapsed. Mary died the following day at the same hospital where she had just given birth. Another Mary McFarland, was taking a dinner break in the shopping center where she worked. The 31-year-old single mom had a migraine. She took 2 Tylenol capsules and minutes later collapsed. She never regained consciousness. That evening, flight attendant Paula Prince landed at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport after a long day. She stopped at a Walgreens on her way home. An ATM surveillance camera captured the 35-year-old purchasing the pills that would kill her. When she failed to show up for work, her sister and a colleague went to her apartment and found her lifeless body. All 7 people died after taking Tylenol. When an investigator with the medical examiner's office first examined the Tylenol bottle from Mary Kellerman's house and the other from the Yanis's, they smelled like bitter almonds. The examiner knew instantly what he was dealing with. The odor was cyanide. He was lucky to catch a whiff of cyanide because only about 60% of the population can detect the bitter almond scent. Out of the 44 remaining capsules in the Yanis's bottle, 4 were found to contain cyanide. Each capsule had between 550 to 610 milligrams of potassium cyanide, nearly 3 times the amount needed to kill someone. Their blood samples tested positive for cyanide poisoning. A dogged reporter named John Flynn Rooney received a tip and broke the story of the poisonings before an official news conference was called. Stores began pulling pain relievers off the shelves. Chicago police drove through the streets using loudspeakers to order people to flush Tylenol down the toilet. These actions likely saved more lives, as no further deaths occurred. Finding the person responsible, however, would not happen so quickly. The corporation that owned Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson, did not think this was the work of an employee. It believed the capsules were laced with cyanide after leaving the factories, because the poison capsules came from multiple manufacturing plants. Investigators believed someone must have taken the bottles off store shelves, pulled the 2 casings apart, laced them with poison, and then reattached the halves before returning them to the store. The capsule on the left is regular Tylenol. The capsule on the right contains cyanide. The powder is off-white and grayish in color and lumpier.
Store management pulled all the Tylenol off the shelves on Thursday.
The poisonings were the biggest story in the country.
Rating Control Center.
We've been receiving calls about once every 15 seconds.
Tylenol was the most popular pain reliever in America.
Extra strength Tylenol, aspirin-free, and you can't buy a more potent pain reliever without a prescription.
Tylenol controlled 37% of the over-the-counter pain reliever market and accounted for $400 million in sales the year before. After the deaths, Tylenol's market share plummeted to 7%. Johnson & Johnson recalled all 31 million bottles of Tylenol capsules. More tainted capsules were found. Fortunately, they had not been sold or consumed. The poisonings changed how over-the-counter drugs were packaged. At the time, there was no protective sealing on any over-the-counter drug bottles. Johnson & Johnson worked with the FDA to include safety seals, which became the norm for packaged food as well. The company also introduced a new version of its pill, the caplet, which was harder to tamper with than the older capsules. A few years later, Tylenol stopped selling its capsule version for good. Johnson & Johnson spent $100 million on the recall and relaunch of Tylenol, and it was worth it. Within a year, Tylenol sales bounced back and once again became America's favorite over-the-counter pain reliever. But for the families of the victims, there was no relief from their pain. Police had not caught the person responsible for the deaths of their loved ones, but they did have someone in mind. About a week after the poisonings, Tylenol's manufacturer, McNeil, a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, received a letter in the mail. Inside was a note written in all caps.
Gentlemen, as you can see, it is easy to place cyanide, both potassium and sodium, into capsules sitting on store shelves. If you want to stop the killing, then wire $1 million to bank account number 8449597 at Continental Illinois Bank, Chicago, Illinois.
Was this really the killer? The FBI discovered that the bank account mentioned in the note belonged to Frederick Miller McCahey, the heir to the Miller Brewing fortune. However, police didn't believe he wrote the letter. The bank account mentioned in the note had been closed after McCahey shut down his travel agency. The letter was traced to his agency's Pitney Bowes stamp machine. Was the letter writer someone who had access to the agency and held a grudge? Police learned that one of McCahey's former employees, Nancy Richardson, was upset that her final paycheck of $511 had bounced. Nancy's husband, Robert Richardson, had angrily confronted McCahey over the check. The Richardsons had moved out of Chicago just weeks before the poisonings. When police issued a warrant for the couple's arrest, they discovered they had been using fake names. Robert and Nancy Richardson were aliases. Their real names were James and Leanne Lewis. Authorities tracked them down in New York City and arrested James Lewis at the New York Public Library. Lewis's fingerprints matched those on the extortion letter sent to Johnson & Johnson. He said he never intended to collect the cash and was simply trying to embarrass his wife's former boss. Lewis may have been the letter writer, but was he the Tylenol killer? During his sentencing hearing in the extortion case, he sat down with CBS 2.
Did you commit the Tylenol murders?
I did not.
Do you know who did?
I do not know who did, no.
But investigators were not convinced. Some believe Lewis resembled the man caught on surveillance video watching flight attendant Paula Prince purchase the Tylenol capsules. Investigators were fortunate to get this shot because the ATM security camera only captured still photos when someone was using the machine. As investigators dug into James Lewis's background, they learned he had a troubled past and faced a murder charge. When he was a little boy, his father abandoned him, then his mother. A couple adopted him at the age of 2 and raised him on a farm in Missouri. As a teen, he attacked his adoptive mother with an axe and spent time in a mental institution. He attended the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where he met Leanne. They married and had a daughter. Tony Ann was born with Down syndrome and had other health problems. By all accounts, Lewis doted on her. An FBI report stated he never showed anger about Tony's condition or blamed anyone. The couple opened a tax accounting business in Kansas City called Lewis & Lewis. One of their clients was an elderly man named Raymond West. West lived a simple, retired life after working as a truck driver. He kept the rose bushes in front of his home perfectly pruned and took walks every day. But one day, he disappeared. When a friend went to his home to check on him, he found a note taped to the front door which read, "Ray is out of town until Thursday. For further, call Jim." It was written on Lewis & Lewis stationery. When West's friend returned to the house a few weeks later, he smelled a foul odor emanating from a bedroom and called police. When police arrived, they looked in the attic and, to their horror, found Raymond West's decomposing body. His legs had been severed. Police quickly zoned in on a suspect, James Lewis. West had made out a check to Lewis for $5,000 dated the last day anyone had heard from him. A handwriting expert concluded the check was likely forged. When police searched Lewis's cars, they found dozens of canceled checks belonging to West. They also found a rope matching the rope found around West's body. Lewis denied killing West and said the rope was from the time he helped West rebuild his home after the flood a year before. There was plenty of circumstantial evidence linking Lewis to the crime, and prosecutors charged him with murder. However, the case was dismissed due to a technicality. Lewis should have been read his Miranda rights before questioning when he was arrested and brought to the police station. This is the "you have the right to remain silent" warning. But police never read him his rights. A judge ruled that police acted improperly in arresting Lewis and threw out the evidence taken from Lewis's cars and all the statements he made to police. Prosecutors lost some of their best circumstantial evidence. There was one other piece of evidence. A fingerprint was found on the pulley used to hoist West's body into the attic, but police had not been able to match the print to Lewis. 3 years later, the FBI used state-of-the-art equipment to confirm that the fingerprint belonged to Lewis. However, Lewis was never recharged with murder. A reason someone is not charged despite new evidence is that it might not be sufficient to meet the burden of proof required for a conviction. What about the Tylenol murders? Could Lewis have been behind those? Investigators believed he had a motive, and it had to do with his daughter. Lewis's daughter, Toni Ann, had a heart defect that required multiple surgeries. When she was 5, the sutures used to repair the hole in her heart tore apart, and she died. A federal investigation later confirmed that the polypropylene sutures that tore were sold under the brand name Prolene, according to records reviewed by the Chicago Tribune. Prolene was produced by Johnson & Johnson, the company that made Tylenol. Lewis blamed the drug manufacturer for the death of his little girl, according to a police sergeant quoted in a Memphis newspaper. He served 13 years for extortion for writing the ransom letter to Johnson & Johnson. While in prison, he produced elaborate sketches that showed how cyanide powder could be packed into capsules. But he insisted he was innocent and was simply trying to help investigators solve the crime. He explained to the Chicago Tribune, "I could tell you how Julius Caesar was killed, but that does not mean I was the killer." Lewis wasn't the only suspect. Police investigated around 400 people, including Roger Arnold, who worked in the warehouse of one of the stores that sold the tainted Tylenol. Arnold also worked with the father of one of the victims, Mary Reiner, who had just given birth. The owner of a bar that Arnold frequented grew concerned after a couple of regulars reported that Arnold had been talking about possessing cyanide and working on a project. The bar owner subsequently tipped off police. When Arnold found out, he became furious and ended up shooting a man he mistakenly believed was the bar owner. The man he shot, a father of 3, died. And Arnold was sentenced to 30 years in prison. But there was still no one behind bars for the poisonings. A few weeks after the murders, the Chicago Tribune appealed to the killer to come forward. Journalist Bob Greene focused on the suffering of the parents of young Mary Kellerman. His article read,
If you are the Tylenol killer, some of this may matter to you, or it may make no difference at all. If you are the Tylenol killer, though, you may be harboring just the vaguest curiosity about the people on the other end of your plan, the people who were unfortunate enough to purchase the bottles you had touched. Mary's mother can't have any more children. Mary was her only baby. You might be interested in knowing that Mary was born 1 month premature, and that as she entered the world, her mother was scared because she wasn't crying. But the doctor smiled and said, "It's all right. She's only sleeping." And she was. She was a quiet child, and because the Kellermans knew she would be their only child, she was especially precious to them. If you are the Tylenol killer, you might want to know that Mary's parents always considered themselves to be overly protective. The reason Mary's parents were like that was that they knew something that a 12-year-old girl couldn't know. They knew that the world can at times be a cruel place, and that parents have a duty to protect their child from dangers the child might not even know are there. They thought They knew about every danger that could possibly touch Mary. But they didn't know about you.